folks here who would like to know a little bit more about you and your life as an artist. I understand you were born here in Navasota and attended school here. Tell us a little bit about your life.
Well, first of all, we can dispense with the formalities. You all can call me Bill, like my family and closest friends. I know it's a little strange for a woman, but I've never been one for convention. Now, I have a lot of family out here in this area. My immediate family was rather small. So you see, I was an only child, and my parents were Ed and May Terrell Blackshear. With Mama being a Terrell, Daddy a Blackshear, you can probably guess that I grew up around the cotton farms here in Grimes County. It was a happy childhood. And even though I didn't spend most of my life in this area, I always considered it home. Now I guess I got interested in art in high school. See, I graduated from Navasota High, and I did all the illustrations for my high school yearbook. The sage. They don't even call it that anymore. I believe now it's the Rattler or something like that.
Well, after high school, where did your art lead you?
Well, after high school, I wanted more in life than to settle down and raise a family like so many of the girls I went to school with. See, I was raised a staunch Baptist. Daddy was the secretary of the Baptist church here, so you can probably imagine that I ended up in Waco at Baylor. There I studied art and got a degree in modern languages. Not a whole lot you can do with a degree like that, so I spent the next few years wandering around trying to find myself, I guess you could say.
Tell us about those years after Baylor.
Well, I guess I thought, where does one go to become an artist? Obvious answer is New York, so that's where I went. In 1918, I enrolled in the Art Student League of New York, and I spent a wonderful year there. I was fortunate to be able to study under Solon Borgla. You may not recognize his name, but I know you are familiar with his work. He was the artist behind Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. Now see, that year in New York really opened my eyes to the world of art. I wasn't a starving artist like so many of my friends I went to school with. Being the only child of a family that was well off financially had its advantages. I spent the next few years wandering around Europe and the United States. Don't get me wrong, I took on a few odd jobs here and there. I even ended up in Los Angeles for a while. You see, the movie industry was all the rage back in those days, and I ended up doing movie posters and hand coloring. I even worked for Mr. Disney for a while.
I believe I know where your art led you after all those years. It was Chicago, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I enrolled in the Art Institute of Chicago in 1924, and, well, I spent 37 years there, so I guess you could say I found myself by that time. While I was there, I was fortunate to be able to study with Helen Gardner, and she and I developed a lifelong friendship. We even collaborated on her book, Art Through the Ages. Eventually, the institution hired me on as an instructor, and I used our book as text for the classes I taught. You know, I understand that Art Through the Ages is still used to teach art history all throughout the country. Who would have believed that when we worked on it back in 1926, almost 100 years ago?
You became Professor Emeritus at the Art Institute. That's quite an accomplishment.
Well, I guess you could say it's an accomplishment, but I saw my greatest success in the students that I taught. Their work is what I'm most proud of.
I believe you met your friend Ethel Spears at the Art Institute. Can you tell us about her?
Well, of course I can. She's buried right here beside me. I met Ethel in Chicago, and we became lifelong friends. We worked together for years, spent many happy summers and holidays right here in Navasota. When I retired in 1961, it was only natural that she moved back here with me. We moved into the house my parents built up on Felder Street, and Ethel used to teach art lessons to the local children upstairs in that house. She was a wonderful and very talented artist. During the Depression, she worked for the WPA, painting murals in schools all through the Chicago area. She was more than just a painter. She worked in ceramics and enameling pieces among many other mediums. But unfortunately, her art led to her passing.
What happened?
Well, we didn't know it at the time, but the paints that Ethel used in her ceramic and enameling pieces were full of lead. And Ethel used to wet the brushes in her mouth. Over the years, she developed lead poisoning. It was a very slow and painful death, God rest her soul. But we had many happy years together in Chicago and in Texas, and I will always have those.
Speaking of Navasota and Grimes County, much of your art was inspired by the people in this area. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, of course I can. See, even though I didn't spend most of my life in this area, I came back to visit whenever I had the chance. All my family was so dear to me. I have such fond memories of growing up on my grandfather's cotton farm. The children of the farm workers were my friends and playmates. It's only natural that I use those memories as inspiration in my art. When I came to town, I would love to go downtown on a Saturday just to watch and sketch the folks who came to shop. And after a week spent in the fields, they would dress in their finest to come to town. It was a lively scene.
Many of the subjects of your art were African American. Did people accept that back in those days?
Well, I don't really care if they accepted it or not. You see, I always marched to the beat of my own drum. Did you know that I was one of the first women in this town to wear pants in public? That caused quite a stir too, but they soon got over it. Oh, you see, I was inspired by what interested and moved me. The people I painted were the heart of this area. It's their hard work on the farms and plantations that made this town what it is, and I just wanted to honor that in my art. Has anyone seen a cigar? Would you like one?
No, thank you.
You sure it's real earthy? Well, suit yourself. I always enjoyed a good cigar.
You not only used African Americans as subjects of your artwork, I believe you sponsored many African American students at the Art Institute. One of the students you assisted, Margaret Burroughs, became quite the artist herself and went on to found the DuSable Museum in Chicago.
Yes, Margaret was a dear girl who was very special to me. You see, I was fortunate that I never had to sell my artwork in order to make a living, and I was able to financially support many students, not all of which were African American. When I started teaching at the Institute, it was right before the Depression. And when that happened, there were many talented artists who could no longer afford to continue their education. I was just blessed with the means to help them. It's what any good person would do.
Was there anything else that inspired you as an artist?
When I started my education, just about all that was mentioned in art history textbooks was European art. My friend Helen changed that. We would take our students to museums to see examples of African masks and textiles, and we introduced them to the beauty of Asian art. And did you know that her textbook was one of the first to include non-Western examples of art? It may seem routine now, but back then it was revolutionary. I guess all these things we shared with our students inspired my own personal art and style too.
After you returned to Navasota, how did you spend your days?
Well, I remained very active in the local art scene. I never was one to sit around and do nothing. So I maintained a studio in Houston lectured quite often throughout the state, mainly at the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. When I was able to spend time with my family, that was very important to me.
Miss Blackshear, Bill, you certainly have left a legacy not only with your work, but with the work of your students. Thank you for sharing a little about your life as an artist.
Very good.